The knife slipped from Alara's hand and hit the stone floor with a sharp clang, and somewhere deep in the castle walls, a low growl answered it. She froze. The sound had not come from the kitchen. It had come from below, from the barracks where the king's guards slept. And it was not the growl of a wolf waking up. It was the growl of a wolf that had just been pulled from sleep by something it could not explain. Alara pressed her back against the cold stone wall and listened. Her heart hammered so hard, she was sure it could be heard through the thick door. She had been in Castle Blackthorn for only 6 days, and already she understood one rule better than any other. Never make a sound that could be mistaken for a threat. The wolves here were not like the wolves of her old pack. They were faster, stronger, and far more suspicious of strangers, especially strangers who came from nowhere and asked for the lowest job in the household. She had asked for that job on purpose. A scullery maid was invisible. A scullery maid scrubbed pots in a corner, and nobody looked twice at her. That was exactly what Alara needed, because the fewer people who looked at her, the fewer people who might recognize what she truly was. The growling stopped. Alara let out a breath she did not know she had been holding, and bent down to pick up the knife. Her hands were shaking. She told herself it was only the cold of the kitchen at this late hour, long after the last servant had gone to bed, and long before the cooks would rise to start the morning fires. She liked working in these quiet hours. Nobody bothered her. Nobody asked where she had come from, or why a girl with soft hands and a straight back was scrubbing floors instead of sitting at a noble's table. She finished washing the last pot, and set it on the shelf beside the others, each one gleaming under the low candlelight. The kitchen at Castle Blackthorn was enormous, built to feed hundreds of wolves at once, but at this hour, it felt almost peaceful. The fires banked low, and the great copper pots hanging still and silent from their hooks. Alara wiped her hands on her apron and looked toward the small window above the wash basin. Outside, the moon hung heavy and full over the mountains, and she could see the shapes of the outer wall where the night guards paced. Somewhere out there was the man everyone in the castle spoke of in hushed, careful voices. King Ronan Blackthorn, Alpha of the Silverbrook Pack. A man so powerful that even his own commanders lowered their eyes when he walked past. She had seen him only once, from a distance, on the day she arrived. He had been standing on the castle steps, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair damp from rain, his eyes the color of storm clouds. He had not looked at her. He had not needed to. Even from across the courtyard, she had felt something in the air shift, like the whole world had gone quiet to listen to him. She shook the thought away. Kings did not concern themselves with kitchen maids, and kitchen maids who wanted to stay safe did not concern themselves with kings. The candle beside her sputtered, and in the sudden dimness, Alara felt the old ache rise in her chest, the one she always felt at night, when the world grew quiet enough for memories to creep back in. She thought of her mother, of the small stone cottage where she had grown up far from any packlands, of the nights her mother would sit by the fire and hum a soft tune while braiding Alara's hair. It was such a simple tune, only a few notes, rising and falling like a gentle wave. Her mother had never explained where the melody came from, only that it had been passed down through the women in their family for longer than anyone could remember. She said it was a lullaby, nothing more, something to soothe a restless child to sleep. But Alara had learned, in the worst way possible, that it was not nothing more. She had been 16 when she hummed it for the first time outside her mother's cottage, sitting on the porch during a warm summer evening, thinking she was completely alone. Within minutes, every dog in the nearby village had begun scratching at doors and windows, whining and pacing, desperate to reach her. Her neighbors had blamed a strange illness passing through the animals. Nobody suspected a girl humming to herself on a porch. But her mother had heard about it, and her mother's face had gone pale in a way Alara had never seen before. That night, her mother told her the truth, in a low, urgent whisper, the kind of whisper reserved for secrets that could get a person killed. The women in their bloodline were called singers, though the old stories sometimes used the word callers. Their voices carried something ancient, something that reached past human ears and touched the wolf beneath the skin. A singer's melody could calm a rampaging wolf in the middle of a battle. It could soothe a frightened pup. It could, if done carelessly, draw every wolf within miles straight to the sound. Her mother made her promise never to hum that tune again, not once, not even alone. Alara had kept that promise for 4 years, until tonight, standing in the quiet dark of a stranger's kitchen, exhausted and homesick, and missing her mother so fiercely it felt like a physical wound. She had let the melody slip out, without even realizing she was doing it. She pressed her hand over her mouth, as if she could take the sound back, but it was too late. It had already left her lips, and drifted out through the gap beneath the kitchen door, out into the stone corridors of a castle, built to house one of the most powerful wolf packs in the entire Northern Territory. A distant howl rose up, then another, and then a whole chorus of them, echoing through the walls like the castle itself had come alive. Alara's blood turned to ice. She had not sung loudly. She had barely hummed at all, 3 notes under her breath, while her hands were busy with dishwater. It should not have carried that far. It should not have reached anyone. But it had. Footsteps thundered somewhere above her, boots slamming against stone, doors banging open. She heard shouting now, urgent and confused, voices calling out to one another, asking what was happening, why the wolves had all woken at once, why they all seemed to be moving in the same direction. Toward the kitchen. Alara's mind raced. She could run. She could slip out the servant's door at the back of the kitchen and disappear into the night before anyone found her here. But if the wolves truly were being pulled toward this exact room, running would only make things worse. A fleeing scent, a fleeing sound, would draw wolves faster than anything else. Predators were built to chase what ran. She forced herself to stay still, to breathe slowly, though every instinct screamed at her to hide. She backed into the corner near the pantry, behind a tall stack of empty crates, and pulled her apron tight around herself, as if the thin fabric could somehow shield her from what was coming. The kitchen door burst open so hard, it cracked against the wall. The first wolf that came through was enormous, its fur a deep charcoal gray, its eyes glowing faintly gold in the dim light. It was not fully shifted, caught somewhere between man and beast, its shoulders too broad and its jaw too long, claws clicking against the stone floor as it prowled forward. Behind it came another, and another, until the kitchen was full of half-shifted warriors, all of them wild-eyed, all of them sniffing the air like something had called them here, and they could not understand why they had answered. Alara pressed herself smaller into the shadows, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain the wolves could hear it. One of them, a broad-chested man with sandy hair and sharp, alert eyes, more human than beast, though his claws had not fully retracted, turned his head sharply toward the corner where she hid. His nostrils flared, his gaze locked onto her. "There," he said, his voice rough with the strain of a body caught between 2 forms. "Something is over there." The other wolves turned as one, their heads swinging toward her hiding place, with terrifying precision. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. The crates were shoved aside as if they weighed nothing at all, and suddenly, she was staring up into the golden eyes of 6 of the deadliest warriors in the kingdom, all of them looking at her like she held the answer to a question they could not put into words. "It's just a maid," one of them said, disappointment and confusion mixing in his voice. "Why would a maid pull us all the way down here?" "I don't know," said the sandy-haired man, still staring at her, his nose working as though trying to catch a scent that had already faded. But something did. Ilara opened her mouth to speak, though she had no idea what she could possibly say to explain what had just happened, when a new presence entered the room. She felt it before she saw it, the way the air seemed to grow heavier, the way every wolf in the kitchen instantly straightened, dropping their eyes, stepping back to make space. King Ronan Blackthorn stood in the doorway. He was fully shifted back into his human form, wearing only a loose shirt and trousers, as though he had been pulled from sleep, his dark hair disheveled, his gray eyes sharp and alert, in a way that made Alara feel like she had been stripped bare and examined down to her bones. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Explain," he said, "why every wolf in this castle just woke from a dead sleep and ran toward the kitchen." Nobody answered right away. The sandy-haired warrior, who Alara would later learn was named Garrick, one of the king's trusted commanders, finally spoke. "We don't know, my king. We felt something. A pull. It was faint, but it was there, and it led us here." He gestured toward the corner, to her. Every eye in the room turned to Alara, including the king's. Ronan's gaze settled on her, and for a long, terrible moment, nobody moved. Alara felt pinned in place, unable to look away from those storm-gray eyes, unable to explain the racing thoughts in her own head. She was going to be blamed for this. She was going to be thrown out, or worse, if anyone in this castle understood what a singer truly was, and what her voice could do. "Who are you?" Ronan asked, his voice low and even, though there was an edge beneath it that made the hair on her arms rise. "Alara," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm a kitchen maid, my king. I've only been here 6 days." "And what were you doing when my wolves woke up?" She swallowed hard. Lying to an alpha king seemed like a very short path to disaster, but telling the truth felt just as dangerous. "Washing dishes," she said, which was not a lie, even if it was not the full truth either. Ronan studied her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly, as though he could sense there was more to the story than she was telling. Around him, the other wolves shifted uncomfortably, still confused by whatever instinct had dragged them from their beds in the middle of the night. "Washing dishes," he repeated slowly, like he was tasting the words and finding them lacking. "Yes, my king. And you felt nothing unusual, heard nothing unusual, did nothing unusual." Alara's mind screamed at her to stay quiet, but something about the way he asked the question, patient and precise, like a hunter who already knew where the prey was hiding and was simply waiting for it to make a mistake, made her realize that silence would only make things worse. "I might have been humming," she admitted quietly. "An old tune. From when I was a child. I didn't think anyone could hear it." Garrick made a low sound in his throat, somewhere between disbelief and understanding. "A tune," he muttered. "That's what did this." Ronan held up a hand, silencing him before he could say anything more. His gaze never left Alara's face. "Hum it again," he said. Her stomach dropped. "My king, I don't think that's wise." "I didn't ask if it was wise," Ronan said, his voice quiet but carrying an authority that made refusal feel impossible. "I asked you to do it." Every wolf in the room tensed, waiting. Alara's mouth went dry. She thought of her mother's warning, of the promise she had broken tonight without even meaning to, of what might happen if she let that melody loose again in a room full of wolves who were already unsettled and confused. But an alpha king did not make requests. He gave commands, and in a castle that was not her home, surrounded by wolves stronger and faster than she could ever hope to outrun, Alara understood she had no choice but to obey. She took a breath, and against every instinct screaming inside her to stay silent, she began to hum. The first note had barely left her lips when every single wolf in the kitchen went rigid, their eyes widening, their bodies leaning toward her as though pulled by an invisible rope. Garrick's claws extended fully before he seemed to catch himself, forcing them back with visible effort. Another wolf actually took a step forward before catching himself, shame flashing across his face at the loss of control. And Ronan, the Alpha King himself, the most powerful wolf in the entire castle, went utterly still. His gray eyes locked on her with an intensity that made her voice falter and the melody die in her throat. "Don't stop," he said, so quietly it was almost a whisper. Alara stared at him, at the way his jaw had tightened, at the way his hands had curled into fists at his sides, as though he were fighting something inside himself. She realized, with a cold jolt of fear, that whatever her voice had done to the other wolves, it had done something even stronger to him. "My king," Garrick said carefully, breaking the silence. "What is she?" Ronan did not answer immediately. He kept his eyes on Alara, and for the first time since he had walked into the kitchen, something other than suspicion moved behind his gaze, something closer to recognition, though she could not begin to guess what he thought he recognized. "I don't know yet," he finally said, "but I intend to find out." He turned to the other wolves, his voice sharpening back into the tone of command. "Return to your posts, all of you. This does not leave this room until I say otherwise." The warriors filed out slowly, casting uneasy glances back at Alara as they went, none of them quite understanding what they had just witnessed, but all of them clearly shaken by it. Garrick lingered longest, his eyes moving between Alara and his king, before he too finally turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. And then it was only the two of them, standing in the flickering candlelight of the enormous kitchen, the smell of soap and firewood still hanging in the air, the echo of a melody that should never have been sung still trembling between them. "Sit down," Ronan said, gesturing to a wooden stool near the hearth. It was not quite a command, but it was not quite a request either. Alara sat, her legs unsteady beneath her, and waited to learn just how much trouble a few simple notes had truly caused. Ronan did not sit across from her the way a man simply passing time might. He stood near the hearth, arms crossed, studying Ilara with the focused attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces refused to fit together cleanly. The fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the stone floor, and the silence between them stretched until Ilara felt as though it might snap. "Where did you learn that tune?" he asked finally. "My mother taught it to me," Ilara said. "When I was a child, she used to hum it while braiding my hair before bed. And she never told you what it was. She told me it was a lullaby, nothing more." Ronan's eyes narrowed slightly, not with suspicion this time, but with something closer to careful thought. A lullaby that pulls every wolf in a castle from a dead sleep is no ordinary lullaby. Ilara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire crackling nearby. "I didn't know it could do that. Not until I was 16, and even then, it only reached the dogs in my village. Nothing like this. Nothing this strong." "The dogs in your village," Ronan repeated slowly. "Not wolves." "There were no wolves near my village," Ilara said. "My family kept away from packlands. My mother always said it was safer that way." Something flickered across Ronan's face, quick and unreadable, gone before Ilara could name it. He turned away from her, pacing toward the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Outside, the moon had begun its slow descent toward the mountains, and the castle grounds were quiet again. The earlier chaos settled into an uneasy stillness. "There are old stories," Ronan said, his back still to her, "about women whose voices could reach a wolf's true nature, past the human mind entirely. My grandmother used to speak of them when I was young, though I always assumed they were nothing more than bedtime tales meant to frighten pups into behaving." He turned to look at her again. "I did not expect to meet one standing in my own kitchen." Ilara's stomach twisted. "I'm not trying to cause trouble, my king. I only wanted quiet work, a place where nobody would look at me twice. And instead, you have become the single most interesting thing to happen in this castle, in a very long time," Ronan said, though there was no cruelty in his tone, only a kind of dry, considering honesty. "What happens now?" Ilara asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Ronan studied her for a long moment before answering. "Now, you will not sing again until I understand exactly what you are and what you are capable of. Not humming, not whistling, nothing that could be mistaken for a tune. Do you understand?" "Yes, my king. And you will not speak of tonight to anyone outside this room. Not the other maids, not the cooks, not the guards who saw you. If word spreads that a singer lives in this castle before I decide how to handle it, there will be consequences neither of us wants." Ilara nodded quickly, grateful that his solution seemed to involve secrecy rather than punishment. "I understand." Ronan studied her a moment longer, and Ilara had the uncomfortable sense that he was weighing something in his mind, while deciding how much to reveal and how much to keep hidden. Finally he spoke again, his voice quieter now. "Do you know why my wolves are so unsettled these days?" he said. It did not sound like a question meant to be answered. "This pack has been fractured for 3 years, ever since my father died and left the throne to me, before I was ready to hold it. Half the commanders still whisper that my younger brother should have taken the crown instead. There are nights I feel the tension in these walls like a physical weight, wolves circling each other instead of standing together." He paused. "Tonight, for just a moment, every wolf in this castle moved as one, toward the same sound. The same pull." Ilara said nothing, unsure what response he wanted from her, unsure if he wanted a response at all. "That kind of unity," Ronan continued, almost to himself, "is worth more to me than gold or land." "I don't understand what you're saying, my king." He looked at her then, and something in his gray eyes had shifted, sharpened into a kind of quiet resolve. "I am saying that whatever you are, Ilara, you may be far more valuable to this pack than a pair of hands scrubbing pots in the dark." He shook his head slightly, as though catching himself moving too quickly. "But that is a matter for another day. Tonight, you will return to your quarters and rest. Tomorrow, I will decide what to do about this." Ilara rose from the stool on unsteady legs, uncertain whether she should feel relieved or more afraid than before. "Yes, my king." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her at the door. "Ilara." She turned back to face him. "Thank you for telling the truth," he said. "It would have been easy to lie." "Lying to an alpha king seemed unwise," she said, before she could stop herself. The faintest hint of a smile touched the corner of his mouth, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. Smart girl. Go and rest. She left the kitchen quickly, her heart still pounding, though for entirely different reasons than it had an hour before. The servants' quarters were tucked into the eastern wing of the castle, a long hallway lined with small rooms, shared by 2 or 3 maids each. Elara slipped through the corridor as quietly as she could, praying nobody would ask her where she had been at such a late hour. She reached her small shared room, and found her roommate, a cheerful, round-faced girl named Mira, sitting up in bed with a candle burning beside her. "You're back," Mira whispered, relief flooding her face. "I heard the commotion. Everyone's talking about it. They say the wolves went mad in the middle of the night, running through the halls like something had possessed them." Her eyes widened. "Were you down there? Did you see anything?" Elara's mind raced for an answer that would satisfy Mira's curiosity, without revealing the truth. "I was in the kitchen," she said carefully. "The guards came through looking for something. I don't know what set them off." Mira shivered, pulling her blanket tighter around her shoulders. "It's strange, isn't it, living among wolves? You never know what might spook them." She yawned, clearly exhausted despite her curiosity. "Well, whatever it was, I'm glad it's over. Get some sleep. Morning comes early around here, and Cook will have both our heads if we're late again." Elara climbed into her own narrow bed and blew out the last remaining candle, but sleep did not come easily. She lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling, replaying every moment of the encounter in her mind, from the terrifying rush of wolves bursting into the kitchen, to the strange, quiet intensity in King Ronan's eyes when she had hummed the tune again at his command. She thought of her mother's warning, the fear in her voice when she had explained what a singer's melody could do. Her mother had made her promise never to use it, never to risk drawing attention to herself, because a woman with such a gift was never truly safe. Powerful men would want to use her. Desperate men would want to control her. And now, on her 6th night in a castle full of the most powerful wolves in the Northern Territory, she had done exactly the thing her mother had warned her against. But strangely, lying there in the dark, Elara did not feel only fear. She felt something else too, something she did not quite have a name for yet, a small flicker of curiosity about what King Ronan had meant when he said she might be valuable to his fractured pack. For years, she had hidden what she was, ashamed of a gift that had only ever caused trouble. For the first time, someone had looked at her and seen something other than a problem to be solved, or a danger to be avoided. She finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, sometime before dawn, her dreams filled with the sound of running feet and glowing golden eyes, and a pair of storm-gray eyes that would not stop watching her. Morning came far too soon. Elara woke to the sound of Mira shaking her shoulder, already dressed and ready for the day. "Come on, sleepy," Mira said. "Cook wants the ovens going before the sun is fully up, and half the kitchen staff is already down there grumbling about last night's chaos." Elara dragged herself out of bed, her body heavy with exhaustion, and dressed quickly in her plain gray uniform. As she made her way down to the kitchen, she noticed the whispers following her through the halls, servants exchanging glances and murmured questions about the strange events of the previous night. Nobody seemed to suspect her directly, but the fear of discovery pressed heavily on her chest all the same. The kitchen was already bustling with activity by the time she arrived, cooks shouting orders, maids hurrying between the ovens and the long wooden tables, the smell of fresh bread and roasting meat filling the air. Elara took her place at the wash basin, grateful for the mindless, repetitive work that let her keep her head down and avoid conversation. She had barely finished her first stack of dishes when the head cook, a stern woman named Odette, appeared at her side, wiping her hands on her apron. "You," Odette said, her sharp eyes fixed on Elara. "The king wants you brought to his study after the morning meal is served. Don't ask me why. I only deliver messages. I don't question them." Elara's stomach dropped. Several of the other kitchen staff turned to stare, curiosity and suspicion mixing on their faces. A summons from the king himself was unheard of for someone as low-ranking as a scullery maid, and Elara knew every set of eyes in that kitchen would be watching her walk away, wondering what she had done to earn such attention. She finished her work as quickly as she could, her hands trembling slightly as she dried the last of the morning dishes, and when the meal had been served and the kitchen settled into its usual mid-morning lull, she made her way toward the king's study, dread and anticipation tangled together in her chest. A guard stationed outside the heavy wooden door recognized her immediately and stepped aside without a word, pushing the door open for her. Elara stepped inside and found King Ronan Blackthorn seated behind a large desk covered in maps and papers, his sharp gray eyes lifting to meet hers the moment she entered. "Close the door," he said, "and sit down. We have a great deal to discuss." Elara closed the door behind her, the click of the latch sounding far louder than it should have in the tense quiet of the room. She crossed to the chair Ronan had gestured toward and sat carefully, folding her hands in her lap to keep them from trembling. Ronan set down the paper he had been reading and studied her for a long moment. In the morning light streaming through the tall windows behind him, she could see him more clearly than she had the night before. His face was lined with a tiredness that went deeper than lack of sleep, the kind of exhaustion that came from carrying too much responsibility for too long. He looked younger than she had expected for a man who commanded so much fear and respect, though the weight in his eyes made him seem far older than his years. "I spent the early hours of this morning speaking with our castle historian," Ronan said without preamble. "A man named Hollis, who has spent more years buried in old records than most people spend alive. I asked him what he knew of singers." Elara's fingers tightened in her lap. "And what did he tell you?" "That the bloodline is older than the pack itself. That centuries ago, before the northern territories were divided the way they are now, singers were sought after by every pack leader with enough sense to recognize their value. Their voices could calm a wolf mid-transformation, ease the pain of a difficult shift, and in times of war, call scattered warriors back to their leader's side, even across great distances." He paused. "Hollis believes the bloodline nearly died out 2 generations ago, hunted by rival packs who feared what a singer allied with an enemy might accomplish." Elara felt a chill settle over her. "Hunted. Killed, more precisely," Ronan said, his voice quiet but not unkind. "There is a reason your mother kept you away from packlands, Elara. She was protecting you, and she was right to." "She never told me any of this," Elara whispered. "Only that I should never sing where anyone could hear. She likely didn't know all of it herself. Much of this history has been buried or lost entirely, but Hollis found enough in the old records to confirm what happened last night was not some strange accident. It was exactly what a singer's voice is meant to do." Ronan leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes fixed intently on her face. "Which brings me to the reason I asked you here." Elara braced herself. "My king?" "This pack is not what it once was," Ronan said, and for the first time since she had met him, she heard something almost like frustration creeping into his voice. "My father ruled for 30 years, and in that time he built alliances and loyalty that I inherited far too suddenly when he died. I was not prepared to be alpha, not at the age I became one, and there are commanders in this castle who have never fully accepted my authority. Half of them believe my younger brother Corwin should sit on this throne instead of me." "I didn't know you had a brother," Elara said. "Corwin left the castle 2 years ago, after a disagreement neither of us has ever fully resolved. He commands a smaller pack now, to the east, and there are those in my own court who still send him messages, still hope he might return and challenge me for the crown." Ronan's jaw tightened. "A divided pack is a weak pack, Elara, and a weak pack is vulnerable to every rival alpha in the northern territories, who would love nothing more than to see Silverbrook fall." Elara studied his face, trying to understand where this conversation was leading. "What does any of this have to do with me?" Ronan held her gaze steadily. "Last night, for the first time in 3 years, every wolf in this castle moved as one. Not toward a threat, not toward an enemy, but toward a single sound, drawn together by something deeper than loyalty or fear. I have spent 3 years trying to build that kind of unity, through strength and strategy, and you achieved a version of it by accident, simply by humming a tune while washing dishes." "You want me to use it," Elara said slowly, understanding dawning cold and heavy in her chest. "On your pack." "I want to understand what you're capable of," Ronan corrected, though the distinction felt thin to her ears. "I am not asking you to become a weapon, Elara. I am asking you to help me understand a gift that could, if used carefully, and with your consent, help hold this pack together during a time when it desperately needs holding together." Elara sat in silence for a long moment, turning his words over in her mind. Everything in her wanted to refuse, to insist she was nothing more than a kitchen maid who wanted to be left alone. But she thought of the wolves who had burst into the kitchen the night before, confused and searching, drawn by nothing more than a few notes she had not even meant to sing. She thought of what her mother had told her about the danger of powerful men wanting to control a gift like hers. But Ronan had not asked her to hand her voice over to him. He had asked for her consent. "What would you want me to do exactly?" she asked carefully. "I don't know yet," Ronan admitted, and there was an honesty in his answer that surprised her. "This is new territory for both of us. I would want to understand the limits of your gift, how far your voice carries, whether it can be controlled, directed, focused on specific wolves, rather than every wolf within earshot. Whether it works only on instinct, or whether there is skill involved that can be learned and refined." "And if I say no," Ilara said, "if I tell you I only want to keep scrubbing pots and stay far away from all of this?" Something shifted in Ronan's expression, a flicker of something that looked almost like respect. "Then you will keep scrubbing pots, and I will find another way to hold my pack together. I will not force this on you, Ilara. A gift used against someone's will is no gift at all. It becomes exactly the kind of weapon your mother feared it would." Ilara studied him carefully, searching his face for any sign of deception, any hint that his words were simply a gentler way of getting what he wanted, regardless of her answer. But she found nothing, except quiet, patient sincerity, and something in that steadied the racing fear in her chest. "I need time to think," she said finally. "You have it," Ronan said. "Take as long as you need. In the meantime, you will remain in the kitchens, and this conversation stays between the two of us and Hollis, who has already sworn his silence." He paused. "There is one more thing, however, that I must ask of you, regardless of your decision." "What is that?" "Discretion," Ronan said. "Word of what happened last night has already begun to spread through the castle, even without details. My commanders will want answers, and some of them are clever enough to eventually piece together the truth on their own. I need you to be careful. Careful of who you speak to. Careful of what you allow yourself to hum even when you think no one can hear. Not every wolf in this castle shares my restraint, Ilara. Some of them would see a singer as nothing more than a tool to be claimed, and I do not intend to let that happen to you." The protectiveness in his voice caught her off guard, warmer and more personal than she expected from a king discussing pack politics. She nodded, unsure what to say in response to such a promise. "Thank you, my king," she said quietly. "Ronan," he said. "When we are alone, you may call me Ronan." Ilara blinked, surprised by the offer, uncertain if it was appropriate to accept it. "That doesn't seem proper, my king." The corner of his mouth lifted again, that same brief, almost reluctant smile she had glimpsed the night before. "Very little about this situation is proper, Ilara. I think we can allow ourselves this one small exception." She left his study a short while later, her mind spinning with everything she had learned, the danger of her bloodline, the fragile state of the pack she now found herself entangled with, and the strange, unexpected kindness of a king who had every reason to simply take what he wanted from her, and had instead asked for her consent. As she made her way back toward the kitchens, she passed Garrick standing guard near the entrance to the west wing. He watched her walk by with careful, assessing eyes, and she felt the weight of his attention long after she had turned the corner and disappeared from his sight. She did not yet know that Garrick had already begun quietly reporting her movements to another commander in the castle, a wolf whose ambitions ran far deeper than simple curiosity about a maid with an unusual gift. She did not know that word of the strange events in the kitchen had already begun traveling far beyond the castle walls, carried by servants who did not fully understand what they had witnessed, but were eager to share the story regardless. And she certainly did not know that somewhere to the east, in a smaller castle commanded by a wolf named Corwin, a messenger was already arriving with news of the strange disturbance that had shaken Silverbrook's pack in the middle of the night, news that would soon reach ears far more dangerous than she could have imagined. For now, Ilara returned to her wash basin, her hands moving through familiar motions, while her mind remained fixed on the conversation she had just left behind, and the strange, uncertain path that now stretched out ahead of her. 3 days passed, and Ilara found herself watched from every direction, though never openly. She noticed it first in small things, a guard lingering a moment too long near the kitchen entrance, a maid who suddenly wanted to walk beside her on errands she had never bothered with before, a commander who found reasons to pass through the kitchen corridor at hours when he had no business being there at all. The most persistent of these was Cassian, the king's beta, a lean, quick-eyed wolf with a reputation for sharp intelligence and sharper instincts. Ronan had assigned him to watch over her, though he had explained it plainly enough during their second private conversation. Cassian will keep an eye on you, Ronan had said, not because I distrust you, but because I need to know you are safe. There are wolves in this castle, who would use you against me, if they learned what you are, and Cassian is the sharpest set of eyes I have. Ilara had not expected to like the arrangement, but Cassian proved surprisingly easy to be around. Unlike Garrick, who watched her with suspicion barely hidden behind his golden eyes, Cassian approached his task with a kind of dry humor that put her at ease despite herself. You know, he said one afternoon, leaning against the kitchen doorway while she peeled a mountain of potatoes for the evening meal. Most maids in this castle would consider it an honor to have the king's personal attention. You seem determined to avoid him entirely. I'm not avoiding him, Ilara said, though it was a lie, and they both knew it. I simply have work to do. Cassian said, clearly unconvinced. And I suppose the fact that you take the long way around the east corridor every morning, adding a full 10 minutes to your walk, just to avoid passing his study, has nothing to do with avoidance. Ilara felt heat rise in her cheeks. You've been watching my morning route. It's my job to watch everything about you, Cassian said easily. Ronan was very specific about that. She did not miss the way he said the king's given name so casually, a familiarity that spoke of years of friendship rather than simple duty. How long have you known him? Cassian's expression softened slightly, the teasing edge fading into something more genuine. Since we were pups, running through these same halls getting into more trouble than either of our fathers could handle. I was there when his father passed, and I was there when half this castle turned their backs on him, because he was young and untested and grieving all at once. He shook his head slightly. He's a better alpha than any of them give him credit for. He simply hasn't had the chance to prove it yet, not with half his own commanders working against him. He mentioned his brother, Ilara said carefully. Corwin. Something flickered across Cassian's face, quick and guarded. Then he trusts you more than I realized. If he's speaking of Corwin already. He straightened, glancing down the corridor, as though checking for anyone who might overhear. That's not a subject for kitchen gossip, Ilara. Not even between the two of us. She nodded, understanding the boundary he had drawn, and returned to her potatoes without pressing further. But the wariness in Cassian's eyes stayed with her long after he had wandered off to continue his rounds, and it deepened her sense that whatever tension existed within Silverbrook's pack, it ran far deeper than a single disagreement between two brothers. That evening, as Ilara carried a tray of bread toward the great hall for the evening meal, she nearly collided with a tall, broad-shouldered wolf she did not recognize, his dark hair cropped close, and his eyes a striking shade of amber that seemed to catch the torchlight in an almost unnatural way. He steadied her tray before it could tip, his grip firm but not unkind. Careful there, he said, his voice smooth and pleasant. Wouldn't want to lose the king's dinner before it even reaches the table. Thank you, Ilara said, straightening the tray and stepping back. I don't believe we've met. Finn, the wolf said, offering a small, easy smile. I arrived from the southern outpost just this morning, delivering reports to the king. You must be new here yourself. I don't recall seeing you before. Ilara, she said, keeping her voice carefully neutral. I've only been here a couple of weeks. Finn's amber eyes studied her a moment longer than felt entirely comfortable, though his expression remained pleasant and unassuming. Well, Ilara, I hope Silverbrook is treating you kindly. It's a good pack, even with all its troubles. He inclined his head politely and continued on his way, leaving Ilara with the distinct, uneasy feeling that his interest in her had not been entirely accidental. She mentioned the encounter to Cassian later that evening, expecting him to dismiss her concern as simple paranoia. Instead, his expression grew sharp and focused. Finn, he repeated, from the southern outposts. That's what he said. The southern outposts don't answer to Silverbrook anymore, Cassian said slowly. They pledged loyalty to Corwin's smaller pack after he left the castle 2 years ago. If a wolf from those outposts is here delivering reports, it means Corwin sent him, which means Corwin already knows something worth investigating is happening inside these walls. Ilara's stomach dropped. You think he knows about me? I think it's very convenient timing, Cassian said grimly, for a messenger from Corwin's territory to arrive just days after every wolf in this castle went running toward the kitchen in the middle of the night. He straightened, his easy humor from earlier entirely gone. "I need to speak with Ronan." He left without another word, and Alara stood alone in the corridor, the tray of bread growing cold in her hands, as a new, sharper fear settled over her. That fear followed her through the following days, coloring every interaction with a new wariness. She found herself glancing over her shoulder more often, listening more carefully to the whispered conversations of the other servants, wondering how much of what had happened in the kitchen had already traveled beyond these walls and into ears that meant her harm. Ronan summoned her again 3 days later, his expression grave, in a way that told her Cassian's suspicions had proven at least partially correct. "Finn was indeed sent by my brother," Ronan confirmed, once she had settled into the chair across from his desk. "Officially, to deliver routine reports from the Southern Territories. Unofficially, I believe he was sent to gather information about the disturbance in the kitchen." "How would Corwin have even heard about it so quickly?" Alara asked. "Servants talk, even when they've been told not to," Ronan said, a note of frustration creeping into his voice. "And Corwin has always kept eyes and ears inside this castle, even after he left it. I should have anticipated this." "What does it mean for me?" Alara asked, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. Ronan's gaze softened slightly, though the tension in his shoulders remained. "It means we no longer have the luxury of time to decide slowly what to do about your gift. If Corwin suspects a singer lives within these walls, he will not simply ask polite questions and walk away. He will want to see for himself, or worse, he will want to claim you for his own pack before I can decide how best to protect you." "Protect me," Alara repeated softly, testing the weight of the words. "Yes," Ronan said, and there was no hesitation in his voice at all. "Whatever else happens, Alara, that much has not changed since the night we met. I do not intend to let anyone use you against your will, not my brother, not any rival alpha, not anyone in this castle who might see you as nothing more than a weapon to be claimed." Alara studied him carefully, searching for any crack in his sincerity, and found none. "Then what do we do?" Ronan leaned back in his chair, his gray eyes distant with thought. "For now, we watch, and we wait, and we make certain that whoever comes looking for answers finds only a castle far too well guarded to give them any." But even as he said the words, Alara could see the tension in his jaw, the quiet worry he was trying carefully not to show her, and she understood that whatever calm reassurance he offered, the danger circling closer to Castle Blackthorn was very real indeed. A full week passed without further incident, and Alara allowed herself to breathe a little easier, though the wariness Ronan and Cassian had instilled in her never fully faded. She kept to the kitchens, spoke to no one about the truth of her bloodline, and hummed nothing at all, not even when she was completely alone. It was during one of the quiet, uneventful evenings that Ronan came to find her himself, a rare occurrence, given how carefully he had tried to keep their meetings private and infrequent. He found her in the kitchen garden, gathering the last of the season's herbs before the evening frost could ruin them. The sky above painted in soft shades of orange and violet as the sun dipped behind the mountains. "You look surprised to see me," Ronan said, watching her from the garden gate. "I am," Alara admitted, straightening from where she had been kneeling among the rosemary. "You don't usually come looking for me. Usually I'm summoned." "I wanted to see you somewhere that wasn't my study," Ronan said, stepping into the garden and closing the gate behind him. "It occurred to me that every conversation we've had so far has taken place across a desk, as though I were interrogating you, rather than simply speaking with you." Alara wiped her dirt-stained hands on her apron, uncertain how to respond to the sudden shift in his manner. "Is something wrong, my king?" "Ronan," he corrected gently, "and no, nothing is wrong, or at least, nothing more wrong than usual." He glanced around the small garden, taking in the neat rows of herbs and the low stone wall surrounding it. Hollis found something else in the old records. "I thought you should hear it directly, rather than secondhand." Alara's stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. What did he find? "A story," Ronan said, "about a singer named Wren, who lived nearly 200 years ago during a time when 3 rival packs were locked in a war that had lasted almost a decade. Wren's voice, according to the record, ended that war in a single night. She stood on a battlefield between the warring packs and sang a melody that stopped every wolf in their tracks, mid-battle, and held them there long enough for the alphas to be forced into a room together and finally negotiate peace. Ilara stared at him, trying to imagine the kind of power such a story implied. That seems impossible. Hollis believes it, and Hollis is not a man given to exaggeration, Ronan said. He believes your gift, properly understood and controlled, could hold this pack together, the way nothing else has managed to in the 3 years since my father died. You want me to try? Ilara said quietly, understanding where this conversation was heading before he could finish it. I want to ask you again, formally this time, whether you would be willing to help me understand what your voice can do. Not as a command, Ilara, as a request, one you are entirely free to refuse. Ilara looked down at her hands, still stained faintly green from the herbs she had been gathering, and thought of everything that had happened since that first night in the kitchen. She thought of the fear in the wolves' eyes when they had burst through the door, confused and searching, and the strange, unexpected sense of unity that had briefly bound them all together despite themselves. She thought of Corwin, somewhere to the east, already suspicious enough to send a messenger sniffing around the castle for answers. If I help you, she said slowly, and it works, what happens to me afterward? Do I go back to scrubbing pots and being forgotten in a corner of the kitchen? Or does everyone in this castle suddenly know exactly what I am, and exactly how valuable I could be to whoever controls me? Ronan's expression grew serious, and he took a step closer, though he stopped well short of crowding her. I will not pretend the second outcome isn't a risk, Ilara. Any use of your gift carries the danger of exposure. But I promise you this. Whatever happens, you will never be treated as a tool in this castle. You will be treated as what you truly are, someone with a rare and powerful gift who deserves protection, respect, and a voice in every decision made about how that gift is used. Ilara studied his face carefully, searching for any hint of the practiced diplomacy that came so easily to men who ruled others, any sign that his promises were simply the right words chosen to secure her cooperation. But what she found instead was something steadier, more honest, a king who seemed genuinely troubled by the idea of using her against her will. What would you want me to try first? She asked finally. Relief flickered briefly across Ronan's face, before he schooled his expression back into careful neutrality. Something small, controlled. Hollis suggested we begin in a private setting, away from the full pack, with only a handful of trusted wolves present, to see whether your voice can be directed at specific individuals, rather than drawing every wolf within earshot. When? Tomorrow evening, if you're willing. In the old training hall, away from the main castle, only myself, Cassian, and Garrick will be present. Ilara nodded slowly, though nerves twisted tightly in her stomach at the thought of deliberately using her gift in front of an audience. All right, I'll try. The following evening arrived far too quickly. Ilara made her way to the old training hall as instructed, a large, mostly empty stone building on the far side of the castle grounds, once used for combat drills, before a newer facility had been built closer to the barracks. The air inside smelled faintly of dust and old wood, and torches lined the walls, casting flickering shadows across the wide-open floor. Ronan was already waiting when she arrived, along with Cassian and Garrick, both of whom watched her enter, with expressions that mixed curiosity and wariness in equal measure. Thank you for coming, Ronan said, stepping forward to greet her. Are you ready? As ready as I can be, Ilara admitted. We'll start simply, Ronan said. Garrick will stand at the far end of the hall. I want you to hum, quietly at first, and try to focus your attention entirely on him, as though you're speaking directly to him and no one else. Ilara glanced at Garrick, who nodded stiffly, clearly still uncertain about the entire exercise. She took a slow breath, trying to steady the nervous flutter in her chest, and began to hum. The first few notes were tentative, barely audible even in the quiet of the empty hall. She watched Garrick carefully, focusing her thoughts on him the way Ronan had instructed, imagining her voice reaching toward him and no one else. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Garrick's shoulders straightened suddenly, his eyes widening as though something had brushed against his senses. He took an involuntary step forward before catching himself, his jaw tightening with visible effort. I feel it, he said, his voice strained. Just a pull, toward you. Ilara stopped humming immediately, and the pull seemed to release him, his shoulders relaxing as though a weight had lifted. Interesting, Cassian murmured, watching the exchange with sharp attention. It reached him without reaching me or Ronan. That suggests it can be directed, at least to some degree. Try again, Ronan said, but this time, focus on Cassian instead. They repeated the exercise several more times, testing whether Alara could direct her voice toward one wolf without drawing the others, whether the strength of the pull changed depending on distance, whether her own emotional state affected the intensity of the effect. Each test revealed something new, and slowly, cautiously, a clearer understanding began to form. Her gift, it seemed, responded most strongly when she deliberately focused her intention on a specific target, rather than simply humming without direction. The pull grew stronger the more emotion she poured into the melody, and weaker when she sang mechanically, without any true feeling behind the notes. It was, Cassian observed, closer to a skill than a simple involuntary reflex, one that could potentially be refined and controlled with enough practice. By the time they finished for the evening, Alara felt drained in a way she had never experienced before, as though the effort of directing her voice so precisely had cost her something beyond simple exhaustion. But beneath the tiredness, she felt something else too, a small, cautious sense of pride at having discovered she was not entirely at the mercy of a gift she did not understand. "You did well tonight," Ronan said as the others filed out of the training hall, leaving the two of them alone in the flickering torchlight. "Better than I expected, honestly." "It felt different than before," Alara admitted. "More like something I was doing, rather than something happening to me." "That matters more than you realize," Ronan said. "A gift you can control is a gift you can trust. And a gift you can trust is one you might eventually be willing to use for something greater than survival." Alara looked up at him, exhaustion mixing with a new, tentative warmth she did not entirely understand. "Is that what you're hoping for? Something greater?" Ronan held her gaze for a long moment before answering. "I'm hoping, Alara, that whatever comes next, it happens because you choose it, not because circumstances force your hand." He paused, "But I would be lying if I said I wasn't hoping for a great deal more than that." Neither of them spoke further on what exactly he meant, but the words settled between them all the same. Quiet and heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to name. Word of the sessions in the training hall did not stay contained for long, despite everyone's best efforts at secrecy. Alara noticed the shift almost immediately. Small changes in how the castle's higher-ranking wolves treated her. Where before she had been invisible, a nameless maid among dozens of others, she now found herself the subject of careful, calculating glances from commanders who had never spared her a second look. It began subtly. A senior warrior named Bram, known throughout the castle for his ambition and his close ties to several commanders who had long questioned Ronan's right to rule, found reasons to linger near the kitchen entrance during her shifts. He never spoke to her directly, but Alara felt his attention like a physical weight, calculating and patient, the way a hunter studied a trail before deciding whether it was worth following. Then came the gifts. Small at first, a ribbon left outside her door, a note tucked beneath her pillow praising her lovely singing voice, though she had sung for no one but the small group in the training hall. Alara brought each one to Cassian, unsettled by how quickly word seemed to be spreading, despite Ronan's insistence on secrecy. "Someone talked," Cassian said grimly, turning the latest note over in his hands, a folded piece of parchment that had appeared on her wash basin that very morning. "Garrick, maybe, though I'd like to believe he's more disciplined than that. Or one of the servants who helped set up the training hall noticed more than they should have." "What do these gifts even mean?" Alara asked, uneasy. "Why would anyone care about a maid's singing voice?" Cassian's expression darkened. "Because word has spread, even without details, that something unusual happened in that kitchen weeks ago, and now rumors are filling in the gaps left by silence. Some of the commanders suspect you're a singer. They don't need confirmation to start positioning themselves for advantage." Positioning themselves how? A singer allied with the right commander could shift the balance of power in this entire pack, Cassian said. If Bram or anyone like him could convince you to favor their faction, to use your gift on their behalf, rather than the king's, it would give them enormous leverage in the ongoing disputes about succession and loyalty. Alara felt sick at the thought. "I have no interest in any of that." "I believe you," Cassian said. "But belief doesn't stop ambitious wolves from trying anyway." The situation grew more complicated a few days later, when Alara was summoned unexpectedly to a small gathering, hosted by Lady Talia, one of the pack's senior noblewomen, known for her sharp political instincts and her careful neutrality in the ongoing tensions between Ronan's supporters and those who still longed for Corwin's return. Alara arrived nervous and uncertain, unclear why a noblewoman of Talia's standing would take any interest in a kitchen maid. Talia received her in a small sitting room decorated with faded tapestries and comfortable well-worn furniture, a stark contrast to the grand formality Alara had expected. She was an older woman, silver threading through her dark hair, her eyes sharp and assessing in a way that reminded Alara uncomfortably of Ronan. "Sit, child," Talia said, gesturing to a chair near the fire. "I imagine you're wondering why I've asked to see you." "I am, my lady," Alara admitted. "I've lived in this castle for over 40 years, Talia said, settling into her own chair with the ease of long practice. "I watched Ronan's father build this pack into something strong and respected, and I watched it begin to crumble the moment he died, and left his son to hold together something far more fragile than either of them realized." She studied Alara carefully. "I have also heard, through channels far too numerous to trace back to any single source, that a singer now lives among us." Alara's breath caught. "My lady, I don't know what you've heard, but I'm not here to expose you, child," Talia said, holding up a weathered hand. "Quite the opposite. I have watched this pack fracture for 3 years, watched good wolves take sides against each other over matters that should never have divided them in the first place. If what I've heard is true, and you truly possess the gift the old stories describe, then you may be the only hope this pack has of healing, before it tears itself apart entirely." "Everyone keeps telling me how important I might be," Alara said, unable to keep a trace of frustration from her voice. "But no one has asked whether I even want this kind of responsibility." Something softened in Talia's expression, an understanding that surprised Alara. "No, I suppose we haven't, have we? Power has a way of making people forget to ask that question." She leaned forward slightly. "So, let me ask it now, plainly. Do you want this, Alara? Not what Ronan wants, not what Hollis's old records suggest you're capable of, not what ambitious commanders hope to gain from you. What do you want?" Alara sat in silence for a long moment, genuinely considering the question, for what felt like the first time since that fateful night in the kitchen. She thought of her mother's fear, of the years spent hiding a gift she had been taught to see only as a danger. She thought of the wolves in the training hall, the strange, undeniable thrill of finally understanding a piece of herself she had never been allowed to explore. She thought of Ronan, and the quiet promise in his eyes that she would never be treated as a tool, only as a person. "I want to matter," Alara said finally, surprising herself with the honesty of the answer. "Not because of what I can do for someone else, but because I chose to use what I have, on my own terms, for something I believe is worth doing." Talia studied her for a long moment, something like approval flickering across her weathered face. "Then perhaps you already understand more about power than half the ambitious fools scheming in this castle ever will." She rose from her chair, signaling the end of their conversation. "Be careful, Alara. Bram and his allies are not patient men, and Corwin's spies have not stopped watching this castle since Finn's visit. Whatever you decide to do with your gift, do it quickly, before someone decides to make that choice for you." Alara left the meeting with Talia's warning echoing in her mind, and that evening, she sought out Ronan in his study, finding him bent over a map of the Northern Territories, his expression tight with concentration. "I spoke with Lady Talia today," Alara said, closing the door behind her. Ronan looked up sharply. "What did she want?" "To warn me," Alara said, "that Bram and his allies are watching me closely, hoping to use whatever I am for their own advantage, and that Corwin's spies haven't stopped watching this castle." Ronan's jaw tightened, frustration flashing across his face. "I was afraid of exactly this. Secrets don't stay buried long in a castle full of wolves, with sharp noses and sharper ambitions." "What do we do?" Alara asked. Ronan was quiet for a long moment, studying the map spread across his desk, as though it might offer some answer neither of them had yet considered. Finally he looked up at her, his gray eyes steady and resolved. "We stop hiding," he said. "Trying to keep you secret has only made you a target for rumor and speculation, without giving you any of the protection that comes with open acknowledgement. If Bram and Corwin already suspect what you are, then continued secrecy serves no purpose, except to leave you vulnerable." "You want to tell the whole pack," Alara said, understanding the weight of what he was suggesting. "I want to protect you, the only way I truly can," Ronan said. "By making it clear, publicly and unmistakably, that you stand under my protection, and that anyone who thinks to use you against my will, or your own, answers directly to me." He paused. "But that decision affects you far more than it affects me, Alara. I will not make it without your agreement." Alara thought of Talia's question, still fresh in her mind. "What do you want?" She thought of years hiding, of a gift treated only as danger, of the strange, unexpected sense of purpose she had felt in the training hall, directing her voice with intention for the first time in her life. "Do it," she said quietly. "I'm tired of hiding." Ronan's expression shifted, something like relief, and something like pride mixing together as he looked at her. "Then we'll announce it at the gathering, 3 nights from now, when the full pack assembles for the autumn feast. Every commander, every noble family, everyone who has ever doubted this pack's strength will see exactly what Silverbrook has gained." Alara nodded, though nerves twisted tightly in her stomach at the thought of standing before the entire assembled pack, no longer hidden, no longer invisible, but fully seen for exactly what she was. She did not yet know that somewhere beyond the castle walls, in a smaller fortress commanded by a wolf, with his own claim to the Silverbrook throne, plans of an entirely different kind were already being set into motion, plans that would arrive at Castle Blackthorn far sooner than anyone expected. The 3 days before the autumn feast passed in a blur of preparation and mounting anxiety. Alara barely recognized her own days, pulled away from her usual kitchen duties to work instead with Cassian, and, occasionally, Talia herself, refining what little control she had over her gift, and preparing for the moment she would stand before the entire assembled pack. "You don't need to perform some grand display," Talia advised her during one of their sessions, the two of them sitting together in the same worn sitting room where they had first spoken. "The pack doesn't need a spectacle. They need to see a king who trusts you, and a singer who carries herself with quiet confidence rather than fear." "Easy for you to say," Alara muttered. "You won't be the one standing in front of hundreds of wolves who could decide, in an instant, that you're more useful as a weapon than a person." Talia's expression softened slightly. "No, but I have watched enough political gatherings in this castle to know that confidence, even when it must be borrowed rather than truly felt, carries more weight than any display of power ever could." Alara took the advice to heart as best she could, though the nervous flutter in her stomach never fully faded as the day of the feast approached. She spent her evenings with Cassian in the training hall, practicing directing her voice with increasing precision, and found herself growing more comfortable with the strange, quiet thrill of controlling something that had once felt entirely beyond her command. Ronan, for his part, remained largely occupied with the political maneuvering necessary to prepare the pack for such an announcement, meeting with commanders and noble families throughout the castle to gauge reactions and, where possible, secure support before the news became public. Alara saw little of him during those 3 days, though he sought her out each evening, if only briefly, to ask how she was faring, and to reassure her that whatever happened at the feast, he would not leave her to face the fallout alone. "You look exhausted," he told her on the evening before the feast, finding her in the garden where she had first told him she would help. "I am," Alara admitted. "I don't think I've fully processed what's about to happen." Ronan settled onto the low stone wall beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him despite the cool evening air. "For what it's worth, I don't think I have either. I've spent 3 years trying to hold this pack together through sheer stubbornness and strategy. Tomorrow, I'm placing a significant piece of that effort in someone else's hands, someone I've known for barely a month." "Does that frighten you?" Alara asked. Ronan considered the question seriously, rather than brushing it aside with easy reassurance. "It should, probably, but it doesn't, not in the way I expected." He glanced at her, something quiet and searching in his gray eyes. "I trust you, Alara. More than I've trusted almost anyone since my father died." The admission settled between them, quiet and weighty, and Alara found herself unable to look away from him, caught in the steady warmth of his gaze. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why trust me, after everything that's happened? After everyone who's tried to use me since that first night?" "Because you've never once asked me for anything," Ronan said. "Every wolf in this castle who has approached me since the news began to spread has wanted something, an alliance, a favor, an advantage over their rivals. You've only ever asked to be left alone, or to understand yourself a little better. That kind of restraint, in a castle full of ambition, is rare enough to be worth trusting." Ilara felt warmth spread through her chest, unrelated entirely to the fire crackling somewhere behind them in the kitchen. I suppose I never expected any of this to be about gaining something. I only wanted to survive quietly, and somehow, I ended up here instead. For whatever it's worth, Ronan said quietly, I'm glad you ended up here. Neither of them spoke further, though the silence between them felt charged with something neither was quite ready to name, and Ilara found herself wondering, not for the first time, whether the quiet warmth building between them was something she should be encouraging, or something she should be more careful to guard against. The following evening arrived far too quickly. The great hall of Castle Blackthorn had been transformed for the autumn feast, long tables laden with roasted meats and autumn vegetables, torches blazing along every wall, and the entire assembled pack, commanders and nobles and lower-ranking warriors alike, gathered in a great sea of anticipation and murmured conversation. Ilara stood in a small antechamber just off the main hall, her hands trembling slightly as she smoothed the simple but well-made dress Talia had insisted she wear for the occasion. Cassian stood beside her, his usual easy humor replaced by careful, focused attention. You'll be fine, he told her. Just remember what Talia said, quiet confidence, not spectacle. I keep telling myself that, Ilara said, but it doesn't seem to be helping much. Before Cassian could respond, the doors to the antechamber opened, and Ronan stepped through, dressed in formal attire that made him look every inch the Alpha King, rather than the tired, overburdened man she had come to know, in quiet, private conversations. He crossed to her immediately, his gray eyes searching her face. Are you ready? He asked. No, Ilara admitted honestly. But I don't think waiting will make me any more ready than I already am. Ronan's expression softened slightly. Whatever happens tonight, I will be standing beside you. This pack will understand that clearly, if nothing else. He offered his arm, and after a brief hesitation, Ilara took it, allowing him to lead her toward the doors of the great hall. The moment they stepped through, the murmured conversation of the assembled pack died away into an expectant hush, hundreds of eyes turning toward their king and the unfamiliar woman standing beside him. Ronan led her to the raised dais at the front of the hall, and Ilara felt the weight of every gaze in the room settle on her, curious and calculating in equal measure. She caught sight of Garrick near the front of the crowd, his expression carefully neutral, and further back, the sharp, assessing gaze of Bram, watching with obvious interest. Wolves of Silverbrook, Ronan began, his voice carrying easily through the silent hall, the natural authority of an alpha commanding every ear in the room. 3 years ago, my father passed the weight of this pack to me sooner than either of us expected, and in the time since, I know many of you have questioned whether I was ready to carry that weight alone. A ripple of uneasy murmurs passed through the crowd, though no one spoke openly against him. Tonight, Ronan continued, I want to introduce someone who has already begun to show me that Silverbrook's strength does not lie only in the might of its warriors, but in bonds far older and far more powerful than any of us fully understood. He turned slightly, gesturing to Ilara beside him. This is Ilara. She carries a gift that has not walked among our people in generations, one the old records call the gift of a singer, a voice capable of reaching the wolf beneath the skin of every one of us. The murmurs rose sharply now, shock and disbelief spreading through the assembled crowd, and Ilara felt her heart pound as hundreds of eyes turned toward her with renewed, intense scrutiny. I know this news raises questions, Ronan continued, his voice steady despite the rising tension in the room. I know some of you will wonder what this means for the balance of power within this pack. Let me be clear. Ilara is not a weapon to be claimed by any faction. She stands under my protection, and any wolf who thinks to use her against her will, or against the unity of this pack, will answer to me directly. Ilara stood beside him, her chin lifted despite the trembling in her hands, meeting the assembled gazes as steadily as she could manage. For a long, tense moment, the hall remained silent, hundreds of wolves processing the weight of what they had just been told. Then, from somewhere near the back of the hall, a voice rose above the silence, cold and deliberately provocative. And how convenient, the voice said, that our young king happens to have found himself a singer, right when his authority is being questioned more sharply than ever. Ilara's stomach dropped as the crowd parted slightly, revealing Bram standing near the back of the hall, his arms crossed, his expression carefully arranged into polite skepticism that did nothing to hide the challenge underneath. "Careful, Bram," Ronan said, his voice dangerously calm. "You're questioning the honesty of your king in front of the entire assembled pack." "I'm asking a reasonable question," Bram said, though the careful respect in his tone did little to soften the accusation beneath it. "How do we know this gift is real, and not simply a convenient story to secure loyalty your rule has struggled to earn on its own merits?" A tense silence fell over the hall, every eye shifting between Ronan and Bram, waiting to see how the confrontation would resolve. Alara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, understanding, with sudden clarity, that whatever happened next would determine far more than her own safety. It would determine whether the assembled pack believed in her, believed in Ronan, or splintered further into the same divisions that had plagued Silverbrook since his father's death. She stepped forward, before Ronan could respond, drawing every eye in the hall toward her. "Then let me show you," she said, her voice carrying farther than she expected in the silent hall, rather than simply telling you. Ronan turned to her sharply, surprise flashing across his face. "Alara, trust me," she said quietly, meeting his eyes for just a moment, before turning back to face the assembled crowd. Every wolf in the great hall watched her now with rapt, uncertain attention, and Bram's expression had shifted from smug challenge to something more wary, as though he had not truly expected his provocation to be answered so directly. Alara took a slow breath, steadying the tremor in her chest, and thought of everything Cassian had taught her in the training hall, about focusing her intention, directing her voice, rather than letting it spill out unguided. She thought of Talia's advice about quiet confidence, and she thought, unexpectedly, of her mother, of the years spent hiding a gift that had only ever been treated as a danger. Tonight, she decided, it would be something else entirely. She began to hum, softly at first, the same simple melody her mother had taught her so many years ago, though she focused her intention carefully, not on drawing every wolf in the hall toward her with confused, uncontrollable force, but on something gentler, a wave of calm settling over the room, easing the tension that had gripped the crowd since Bram's challenge. The effect was immediate and unmistakable. Across the hall, wolves who had been standing rigid with uncertainty, visibly relaxed, their shoulders loosening, their expressions softening from wary suspicion into something closer to quiet wonder. Even Bram, standing near the back of the hall with his arms still crossed, found his posture shifting despite himself, some of the hard skepticism draining from his face. Alara let the melody build slightly, still gentle, still carefully controlled, and watched as the entire assembled pack seemed to breathe as one. A strange, palpable sense of unity, settling over the hall that had nothing to do with fear or command, and everything to do with the simple, undeniable pull of her voice. She stopped after only a few moments, letting the silence settle back over the room, and for a long beat, nobody spoke at all. The wolves who had gathered to question their king's authority now stood quietly, many of them looking at each other with something like surprised recognition, as though they had briefly glimpsed a version of their pack they had forgotten was possible. "That," Ronan said finally, his voice steady but carrying clearly through the hushed hall, "is what Silverbrook stands to gain, should this pack choose unity over division." Bram said nothing for a long moment, his expression carefully unreadable, though something in his posture had shifted, the earlier challenge, replaced by something more thoughtful. Finally, he inclined his head, a small, grudging acknowledgement. "A convincing demonstration," he said. "I withdraw my question, my king." The tension in the hall broke like a held breath finally released, murmured conversation rising once more, though the tone had shifted entirely from uncertain suspicion to something closer to cautious excitement. Ronan turned to Alara, something like awe mixing with relief in his gray eyes. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly, beneath the rising noise of the hall. "I know," Alara said, "but I wanted to. This is my choice too, Ronan, not just yours." Something shifted in his expression at her words, warm and unguarded, in a way she had not seen from him before, and for a moment, it felt as though the entire crowded hall had faded away, leaving only the two of them standing together on the raised dais. The feast continued long into the night, and though Alara remained cautious, aware of the many eyes still tracking her movements throughout the hall, the atmosphere had shifted noticeably. Wolves who had never spared her a glance before, now approached with careful curiosity, and even Garrick, who had watched her with suspicion since that first chaotic night in the kitchen, offered her a respectful nod as she passed. But not every reaction that evening was one of acceptance. Ilara caught sight of Finn, still lingering near the edges of the gathering, his amber eyes tracking the proceedings with careful, calculating attention. When their eyes briefly met across the crowded hall, he offered her a small, polite nod, though something in his expression left her deeply unsettled, a coldness beneath the surface politeness that she could not quite name. Later that night, once the feast had finally wound down, and the great hall had emptied of all but the last lingering servants, clearing away the remains of the celebration, Cassian found her near the edge of the courtyard, staring up at the same full moon that had hung over the mountains the night everything began. "You did well tonight," he said, joining her at the low stone wall overlooking the castle grounds. "Better than well, honestly. I've never seen this pack settle so quickly after a challenge like Bram's." "It doesn't feel like a victory," Ilara admitted. Finn was watching the whole time. I don't think tonight's demonstration reassured him the way it reassured everyone else. Cassian's expression sobered. "No, I imagine it did the opposite. If Corwin already suspected a singer lived within these walls, tonight simply confirmed it beyond any doubt, and gave him a very clear demonstration of exactly how powerful that singer truly is." "So what happens now?" Cassian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant as he considered the question. "Now, I think we should assume Corwin will act sooner rather than later. A demonstration like tonight's doesn't just settle internal doubts, Ilara. It also tells every rival alpha in the Northern Territories exactly what Silverbrook now possesses, and exactly what could be gained by claiming it for themselves." A chill settled over Ilara that had nothing to do with the cool evening air. "Ronan said he would protect me." "He will," Cassian said firmly. "But protecting you from ambitious wolves within these walls is one thing. Protecting you from a rival pack determined to take you by force is another matter entirely. And I don't think any of us fully understood how quickly that threat might arrive until tonight." They stood together in silence for a while longer, the moon casting pale light across the quiet castle grounds, and Ilara found herself thinking, not for the first time, of how quickly her life had transformed since that first fateful night in the kitchen. She had come to Silverbrook seeking nothing more than quiet, invisible work, a place to disappear and stay safe. Instead, she had become the center of a political storm she had never asked for, tangled in the fate of an entire pack, and, increasingly, tangled in feelings for its king that she was not entirely certain she was ready to name. 3 days later, those fears proved entirely justified. Ilara was gathering firewood near the edge of the eastern forest, a task she had volunteered for despite Cassian's mild objections, needing a few moments of solitude away from the watchful eyes that had followed her since the feast. The afternoon sun filtered gently through the autumn leaves, and for a brief, peaceful moment, she allowed herself to forget the mounting dangers circling ever closer to the castle walls. She did not hear the first attacker until it was almost too late. A hand clamped over her mouth from behind, strong and unyielding, and Ilara's firewood scattered across the forest floor as she was hauled backward against a broad, unfamiliar chest. Panic surged through her, sharp and immediate, and she thrashed against the grip, though the wolf holding her barely seemed to notice her struggle. "Quiet now," a low voice murmured against her ear, unfamiliar and cold. "Corwin sends his regards, and his invitation. You're coming with us." Ilara's mind raced, terror threatening to overwhelm every rational thought, but beneath the fear, an instinct rose up sharp and clear. She could not scream, not with the hand clamped firmly over her mouth, but she did not need to scream to be heard. She began to hum against the muffling pressure of the stranger's palm, the sound muffled but not entirely silenced, and she poured every ounce of desperate, urgent fear into the melody, focusing not on a single wolf this time, but on every wolf within any possible reach of her voice, a wide, desperate call for help. The muffled melody vibrated against the stranger's palm, and for a moment, Ilara feared it would not carry far enough through the dense trees to reach anyone who could help her. The wolf holding her cursed under his breath, tightening his grip and dragging her deeper into the forest, away from the castle, toward what she assumed was a waiting group of Corwin's warriors. "Stop that noise," he growled, though there was an edge of uncertainty in his voice now, as though even muffled, her humming unsettled him. Ilara did not stop. She could not stop, not with her life and her freedom hanging in the balance, and she poured every ounce of desperate urgency into the melody, imagining her voice reaching not toward one wolf, but toward every single wolf loyal to Silverbrook within any possible range. The response came faster than she could have hoped. A furious howl erupted from somewhere close by, followed by the crash of something large moving through the underbrush at tremendous speed. The wolf holding her spun around, just as a huge dark shape burst from the trees, fully shifted, teeth bared in a fierce snarl that sent a jolt of terror through Alara despite knowing, somehow, exactly who it was. Ronan. He did not hesitate. He slammed into the wolf, holding her with tremendous force, the impact tearing her free from the stranger's grip and sending her stumbling backward against a tree trunk. She caught herself, gasping, watching in stunned horror as Ronan and her attacker rolled across the forest floor in a violent, snarling tangle of claws and teeth. More shapes crashed through the underbrush now, drawn by the same desperate melody, and Alara recognized Garrick and Cassian among them, both fully shifted, moving with terrifying speed to intercept two more wolves who had been waiting just beyond the tree line, clearly part of the same ambush. The fight was brutal, but mercifully brief. Ronan's opponent, overwhelmed by the ferocity of the king's response, and outnumbered as more Silverbrook warriors arrived, broke away and fled deeper into the forest rather than continue the fight, and Garrick and Cassian's opponents followed suit moments later, disappearing into the trees before they could be captured or further engaged. Ronan shifted back to his human form almost instantly, his chest heaving, blood trickling from a shallow gash along his forearm, and he crossed the distance to Alara in 3 quick strides, pulling her into his arms with a fierceness that spoke of fear far deeper than simple relief. "Are you hurt?" he demanded, pulling back just enough to search her face, his hands framing her cheeks with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the violence that had just unfolded around them. "I'm all right," Alara managed, though her voice trembled badly, frightened but all right. Ronan pulled her close again, his arms tightening around her as though he could not quite convince himself she was truly safe. "I felt your call the moment it reached me. I've never moved so fast in my life." Cassian approached them a moment later, his expression grim, despite the relief evident in his eyes. "They're gone, but they'll be back, and next time, they won't be careless enough to attempt something so close to the castle grounds." "Corwin sent them," Alara said, the stranger's words echoing coldly in her mind. "He said Corwin sends his regards and his invitation." Ronan's jaw tightened, fury flashing behind his gray eyes. "My brother has crossed a line he cannot uncross. Attempting to steal what belongs to Silverbrook, by force, on Silverbrook land, is an act of war, whatever justification he believes he has." "What happens now?" Alara asked, still shaken, still processing how close she had come to being taken. "Now," Ronan said, his voice hardening with resolve, "we make certain nothing like this happens again. You will not leave the castle grounds unaccompanied, not until this threat has been fully addressed, and I will be sending a message to my brother that leaves absolutely no room for misunderstanding about what will happen if he attempts something like this again." They returned to the castle immediately, Ronan keeping Alara close beside him the entire way, his hand never fully releasing hers even as they moved through the castle gates and into the safety of the courtyard, where alarmed servants and guards had already begun gathering, drawn by the commotion of warriors returning from an unexpected skirmish. Talia met them at the entrance to the main hall, her sharp eyes taking in the scene immediately, the blood on Ronan's arm, the visible distress still lingering on Alara's face. "What happened?" "Corwin's men attempted to take Alara from the eastern forest," Ronan said grimly. "They failed, thanks to her own quick thinking, but this will not be the last attempt." Talia's expression darkened considerably. "Then this has moved beyond mere political tension. This is open aggression against Silverbrook itself." She turned to Ronan, her voice sharpening with urgency. "You must address this immediately, and publicly. The pack needs to understand the severity of this threat, and Alara needs protection that goes beyond simple caution." Ronan nodded, already turning his attention to the practical matters of security, issuing quick instructions to the guards who had gathered nearby, arranging for increased patrols along the castle's borders, and additional protection specifically assigned to Alara's movements throughout the grounds. But even as the practical preparations unfolded around her, Alara found herself unable to shake the lingering fear of how close she had come to being taken, of what might have happened had her voice not reached help in time. She excused herself quietly, once the immediate chaos had settled, retreating to the small garden, where she had first told Ronan she would help him understand her gift, needing a few moments of quiet to steady her racing thoughts. Ronan found her there a short while later, his arm freshly bandaged, his expression softening with concern as he approached. "You should be resting," he said gently, settling onto the low stone wall beside her. "I keep thinking about how close it was," Ilara admitted, her voice still unsteady. "If I hadn't been able to hum, if the sound hadn't carried far enough, I would already be gone, taken to wherever Corwin intended to keep me. But you did hum," Ronan said, reaching for her hand and holding it firmly. "And it did carry, and I reached you in time. That's what matters, Ilara. Not what might have happened, but what actually did." Ilara looked up at him, taking in the fierce protectiveness still evident in his gray eyes, the lingering tension in his shoulders from the fight that had only recently ended. "You came so fast," she said softly. "Faster than I thought possible." "I would have run through fire to reach you," Ronan said, his voice low and unguarded in a way she had never heard from him before. "The moment I felt that pull, I understood, with absolute certainty, that losing you was not something I could survive easily." The admission hung between them, weighty and undeniable, and Ilara felt her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the earlier terror of the attack. "Ronan, I know this isn't the moment for such confessions," he said, though he made no move to retract them. "You've just survived an attempted abduction, and here I am, speaking of feelings I have no business burdening you with right now. But I find I cannot pretend any longer that my concern for you is only about your gift, or about what your voice could mean for this pack's unity." Ilara's breath caught, her hand tightening around his. "Then what is it about?" Ronan's gray eyes held hers steadily, unguarded and honest, in a way that made her chest ache with something she had been too afraid to name until this exact moment. "It's about you, Ilara. Only you. The way you faced down Bram's challenge without flinching, the way you chose to help this pack not because I commanded it, but because you decided it mattered, the way, even moments ago, terrified and shaken, you still managed to think clearly enough to call for help rather than simply giving in to fear." "I was terrified," Ilara whispered. "And you acted anyway," Ronan said. "That kind of courage isn't something I take lightly, especially not from someone who has every reason to want nothing more than a quiet, unremarkable life." Ilara studied his face for a long moment, searching for any hesitation, any sign that his words were simply born of the adrenaline still coursing through both their systems after the fight. But she found only steady, quiet sincerity, the same honesty she had come to trust in him since that very first night in the kitchen. "I never expected any of this," she admitted softly. "Not the gift, not the danger, and certainly not you." A small, genuine smile touched Ronan's lips, warmer than any expression she had seen from him before. "Neither did I. But I find, despite everything, that I am deeply grateful for all of it." They sat together in the quiet garden as the evening deepened around them, the immediate danger of Corwin's ambush still pressing at the edges of their thoughts. But for the first time since Ilara had arrived at Castle Blackthorn, she allowed herself to feel something other than fear or duty settle in her chest. Something that felt, tentatively and cautiously, like hope. The days following the failed ambush brought a flurry of activity to Castle Blackthorn. Ronan sent word to his brother through a trusted messenger, a clear and unmistakable warning that any further aggression against Silverbrook, or against Ilara specifically, would be met with the full force of the pack's warriors. Whether Corwin would heed that warning remained uncertain, but for the moment, no further attacks came, and the castle settled into a watchful, cautious calm. Ilara used the time to continue refining her gift under Cassian's careful guidance, and slowly, steadily, she began to understand not just how to control her voice, but why the old stories had once considered singers so valuable to the packs who protected them. Her melody, she discovered, could do far more than simply call wolves together or soothe rising tensions. With practice, she learned to weave calm into a room full of anxious warriors preparing for difficult negotiations, to ease the pain of wolves recovering from injury, to settle the nerves of young pups experiencing their first shift. Word of her growing skill spread through the castle, and where once she had been met with suspicion or calculating ambition, she now found herself increasingly welcomed by the pack she had once feared. Mira, her old roommate from the kitchen quarters, had been delighted rather than intimidated by the revelation of her friend's true nature, and their friendship, rather than souring under the weight of Alara's new position, had only grown stronger. Even Bram, who had challenged her so openly during the autumn feast, approached her one afternoon in the castle courtyard, his expression carefully humble in a way that surprised her. "I owe you an apology," he said, "for doubting you so publicly. I've watched you these past weeks, watched what you've done for wolves in this pack who needed calm more than they needed strength, and I understand now why Ronan trusts you so completely." "Thank you," Alara said, genuinely touched by the acknowledgement. "I understand why you doubted me. Trust isn't something that should be given blindly, especially in a pack that's already been fractured by division." Bram inclined his head respectfully before continuing on his way, and Alara found herself smiling slightly at the unexpected reconciliation, one small piece of evidence that the pack truly was beginning to heal in ways she had never expected to witness firsthand. The greatest test of that healing came nearly a month after the failed ambush, when Ronan called together the full pack once more, this time not for a feast, but for a formal council meeting to address the growing tension with Corwin's breakaway territory. Commanders and noble families filled the great hall, the mood tense but far more unified than it had been during the autumn feast, and Ronan stood at the front of the assembly, with Alara beside him, no longer hidden, no longer secret, but openly acknowledged as an essential part of Silverbrook's strength. "We stand at a crossroads," Ronan told the assembled pack, his voice carrying the weight of genuine leadership rather than desperate authority. "My brother has chosen aggression over reconciliation, and I understand there are still those among you who sympathize with his claim to this throne. But I ask you to consider what unity has already accomplished in these past weeks, what Alara's gift has shown us about the strength this pack can find when we choose to stand together, rather than tear ourselves apart over old grievances." He turned to Alara, offering her the same silent invitation he had extended during the autumn feast, and this time, she stepped forward without hesitation, her earlier nervousness replaced by quiet, steady confidence. She began to hum, and this time, she did not focus on a single wolf, nor did she attempt only a gentle wave of calm. Instead, she poured every ounce of understanding she had gained about her own gift into the melody, reaching toward every wolf in the assembled hall at once, weaving a sense of shared purpose and genuine connection that went beyond simple obedience or fear. The response was immediate and profound. Wolves who had spent years quietly resenting each other over old political disputes found themselves standing shoulder to shoulder, a strange, undeniable sense of shared identity settling over the entire hall. Even those commanders who had once sympathized most strongly with Corwin's claim found themselves swept up in the quiet, powerful unity of the moment, their old resentments softening beneath the weight of something far more fundamental than politics. When the melody finally faded, the silence that followed was different from the tense uncertainty of the autumn feast. It was the silence of hundreds of wolves recognizing, perhaps for the first time in years, exactly what their pack could become if they chose to move forward together, rather than remain divided by old wounds. "This," Ronan said quietly into that silence, "is what Silverbrook stands to lose if we allow ourselves to remain fractured, and this is what we stand to gain if we choose, together, to move forward as one pack rather than several competing factions." A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall, quiet but unmistakable, and Alara felt a swell of genuine pride at having played a part in bringing this fractured pack closer to healing than it had been in years. In the weeks that followed, word eventually reached Silverbrook that Corwin, faced with the undeniable strength and unity his brother's pack had found, had quietly withdrawn his more aggressive schemes, unwilling to risk open war against a pack now bound together by something far stronger than simple loyalty to its king. Whether true reconciliation between the brothers would ever be possible remained uncertain, but for now, the immediate threat had passed, and Castle Blackthorn settled into a period of hard-won peace. Alara found herself, one quiet evening months after that first chaotic night in the kitchen, standing once more in the same small garden, where she had first agreed to help Ronan understand her gift. The autumn chill had deepened into the first frost of winter, and she pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders as she watched the moon rise slowly over the mountains. Ronan found her there, as he so often did now, though their meetings no longer required the careful secrecy of those early days. He settled beside her on the low stone wall, his presence warm and familiar in a way that had become as natural to her as breathing. "You've transformed this pack," he said quietly, watching the same moon she had been studying. "More than I ever imagined possible when I first found you hiding behind those crates in the kitchen." "We transformed it together," Ilara corrected gently. "I couldn't have done any of this without your trust, without you insisting, again and again, that this was my choice to make." Ronan turned to look at her then, his gray eyes soft in the moonlight, warmer than she had ever seen them during those first tense weeks of suspicion and uncertainty. "I meant what I said that night in the forest, Ilara. This was never only about your gift, or about what it could mean for Silverbrook's future. It has always, from the very beginning, been about you." Ilara felt her heart swell, with the same tentative hope she had first allowed herself to feel that night, though it no longer felt tentative at all, but steady and certain, the way she imagined true belonging must feel after years of hiding and uncertainty. "I came to this castle looking for nothing more than quiet, invisible work," she said softly. "I never imagined I would find a home instead, or a king who saw me as more than the danger my mother always warned me I could become." "You were never a danger," Ronan said, reaching for her hand and holding it firmly in his own. "You were always exactly what this pack needed, and exactly what I needed, though it took a chaotic night of wolves running through the castle for either of us to realize it." Ilara laughed softly, the sound carrying easily through the quiet garden, and Ronan smiled in response, warm and unguarded, in a way that had become entirely natural between them now. Word of the kitchen maid, who had sung one simple melody and called every one of the Alpha King's wolves, running would be told and retold throughout Silverbrook for generations to come, a story of a fractured pack, healed not through strength or strategy alone, but through the courage of a young woman who chose, again and again, to use her rare and powerful gift, not as a weapon, but as a bridge between wolves who had forgotten how to stand together. And beneath the same full moon that had first drawn every wolf in the castle toward the sound of her voice, Ilara stood beside the king she had come to love, no longer hiding, no longer afraid, but finally, fully home.